Good morning. It's Monday morning, the 23rd of November, and I am recording for you yesterday's sermon. Unfortunately, we had a problem with the recording in church, and so there was very poor quality in terms of what you would have received at home. So I'm just rereading that sermon for you this morning. And it's actually based on the very well-known parable of the sheep and the goats. And of course we know that the sheep are the ones on the right-hand side of Jesus and are so-called righteous ones, and the goats on the left, and they are the ones who will suffer the most judgment. And then of course those immortal words, away from me, I never knew you, which I think is something that each one of us thinks about, maybe not constantly, but is always conscious that in our Christian walk that it might not apply to us. So let's just go with the thoughts that I had for yesterday, and I hope that they will make some sense to you. So it's Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. And of course, apart from anything else, it was to celebrate the feast of Christ the King. The Jesus that we meet throughout Matthew's Gospel is someone who wants to encourage the persecuted church to become a faith-based community. People who see that the word as revealed in Jesus Christ encompasses actions and deeds and a desire for all people to come together forever as children of a living God, with Jesus as the role model to define this for us and to encourage us as we move forward in his name. The parable of the sheep and the goats is the last parable in Matthew's Gospel, and his Gospel in particular uses parables as narratives for how a Christian community should function and behave. In today's parable, we're also given an eschatological view. It points to the future, the end times, and thus the sheep and the goats are good descriptors of the options being offered to us as we choose who we will follow and how we will behave, and what we will believe also. Firstly, the ones being judged are not Jews nor Jewish Christians specifically, but the nations. This is a traditional term for the Gentiles. The question that Matthew's Jesus handles in this version is not about the ethics of the church or even about Jesus' disciples, but the response to the least of these on the part of the nations, the part of the Gentiles. Also recall as well that in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is always concerned about how to equip and empower a persecuted church. Did you notice that those who are on the king's right, in other words, who are offered salvation, we are told, and those who are on his left, and therefore judged as being unrighteous, we are told, both groups were equally surprised as to why they were separated, why this was to be their fate. What did we do to be selected as those who were righteous and those who were not? And if we feel that we fall into the group who are righteous or saved, did we do enough to ensure that those who did not fall into the same group were given a good and consistent example of what was required to make them choose a better option? In other words, how, as Christians, we live our life. Both groups were not aware whether they had either neglected or responded to the least of these. It's interesting in this apocalyptic vision, both the positive and the negative effect of how the people responded to the word, that is, to Jesus, is starkly revealed. This revelation, therefore, confounds both groups. So Matthew leaves us with this conclusion about our faith, or lack of it. It's a judgment vision over which the Son of Man, and only he, presides. The ethical emphasis is no doubt there. Matthew expects not just words, but deeds and actions. So this judgment is not the ethics of the faithful, but the judgment of the Gentiles, those who would either respond positively or negatively to the little ones, the least of these that make up Christ's community. This vision is the final eschatological parable because it answers the question, what will God do with all those others outside of the community? Those who either persecute Christians or otherwise feed, visit, or clothe them in their time of persecution. If you were part of the righteous community, you might want to know that the Son of Man, the King, the Shepherd, has got your community's back, ultimately. Of course, this view is less pleasing to our ears. It seems somewhat sectarian and may well seem to fall short of the ethical heights we had hoped it would aspire to. Yet there are still important things to remember from the rest of Matthew's Gospel. Love of enemies is central to the teaching of the Jesus who narrates this parable. It is, if its concern is the persecuted community, that community is still called to love in line with this radical ethic. Whatever this end vision is, it is not about asserting that our persecutors will get what they deserve and that Christians will get to watch them suffer. The sheep and the goats, well, they still don't know. But the church in this final eschatological parable is given a kind of apocalyptic vision of judgment to see how the Son of Man, the King, the Shepherd, will respond to the nations. Judgment means that things will be set right. But here it also means more. The community of faith is given a preview of what is to come, and in the process now sees outsiders, the nations that is, in a different light. God will remember their suffering and persecution. God will also remember the kindness, the mercy, the love from those who might think they are enemies to them, to the church, to the least of these. I was asked this week to answer a question about one of the churches that we know puts the prosperity gospel at the front of its teachings. And many people have followed that. They have done very well in their lives as they follow what they see are the prescriptions of this prosperity gospel. They give a lot to the church. And I know that this is all about blessing, but many of these people feel that they have had blessing after blessing after blessing heaped onto them because of the fact that they believe that this is how a prosperity gospel works for them and for their church. Now, we might take a different view of that, but I also know that this particular church has done so much with the money that it gets from these people who are giving money, we assume, in order to be blessed. They have day clinics, they have housing projects, they have feeding schemes. They put children through tertiary education at no cost to themselves. They actually do a lot to make a difference in the community. So maybe sometimes we actually need to revisit this concept of the prosperity gospel and see exactly what it does mean. And I leave that for you to think about. But the question then becomes, what about us? What is our fate as God's people? We in the mainline churches may not be persecuted, but we feel more than a little shunted to the side in a culture undergoing profound change. Matthew's vision of the sheep and the goats relativizes at least some of our assumptions. Those who do not belong to our churches are not ultimately to be designated as others or as not us, but to be seen in the light of the demanding, unconditional love of God, which extends, yes, even to the enemies, perhaps especially to the enemies, or, if you prefer, even to others. The mainline white churches sometimes seem perilously close to hardening of their hearts. Could it be that an end-time vision of sheep and goats may be just what we need to soften us up as the old age ends and a new one dawns? Am I a sheep who finally becomes a goat? Or a goat who finally becomes a sheep? My friends, do all you can to ensure that you do not take on board the sin of pride in your life, and rather make your life an offering of humility, where you open the door to everyone else and allow God to make judgments that are his own. Something for us to think about for this week. Amen.